Hey guys, this is Brian from Pic1. So this tutorial is for those who are completely new to Photoshop. I'll be covering some basic Photoshop interface and common tools to get you all started, hopefully making Photoshop a little bit less intimidating. The version of Photoshop I'm using is Photoshop CC 2018. I'll point out any differences with an older version when we come across it. I'm also going to be using a PC. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is to create a new image, and like many other programs, it's under File. From here you can see that you can save, open files, but for now we're going to go File, New, and then this window will pop up. The older version will look a little bit different, but pretty much it's the same. The older version is under more of a drop down box menu, but for this one it's more of a tab menu here. So the size of the canvas I want to use is really depending on your project, but for me I generally go towards more of an A5 or A6. So where you want to find it is that it's under Print. You can go view all presets, and you can see A6 is here. I generally would like using between 72 and 300 pixels per inch, and just a quick note is that printers can't print more than 300 pixels per inch. And then we press create, and then as you can see a new page has appeared and also a new tab. So from here you can also cycle through other images that you might have opened, and you can also close them as well. The first thing I guess is navigating, and how do we zoom in, zoom out, pan around. To zoom in, we can press Alt, and using your scroll wheel on your mouse we can roll up and down to zoom in, or you can press Control, holding down Control and spacebar. You can see how the cursor changes to a magnifying glass, and we can drag left and right and we can zoom in. To pan around, panning is actually just holding down space, and you can see how the cursor also changes to a hand. But if you have zoomed out and you can see your whole canvas, you actually can't pan around unless you actually zoom in, which allows you to pan around. You can, however, pan around when it's full screen in different modes. So to cycle through different modes, you can press F, which changes Photoshop into a full screen mode. And now by holding down spacebar, we can pan around the canvas. By pressing F again, it will also eliminate auto user interface, changes the background to black, and from here you can also pan around your canvas. Pressing F once more goes back to the original. And just another one, by pressing Tab, it's also a quick way to hide all your user interface. Just the Tab key. The first tool we want to kind of look at is the brush tool, which is located on this toolbar. So if you can't see the brush tool selected here, it might be actually inside the pencil tool. But just note that all of these tools have hidden tools inside it. So by clicking and holding, you can see more tools appear. And so the brush tool is just located inside the pencil tool. So you have selected the brush and you can already start drawing on your canvas. But say you want to change your brush, you can actually change it by pressing right click, and you'll see that this little window pops up which actually follows your cursor if you press right click around. So this window might look a little bit different depending on the version you have. The biggest one is the fact that the new one has folders, so you can actually have I guess categorize it a little bit more neatly. But if not, they'll probably just be all stacked on top of each other. Now each brush, Photoshop gives a lot of good default brushes as well, which you can just play around with. But say for instance you want to load some brushes that you might have downloaded or might have made yourself. On the top right you can see how there's a little gearbox. If you click on that one, you can go to import brushes, and then you can import your new brushes. For the older versions, it might look a little bit different. It might be load brushes or replace brushes or append brushes. Relatively they're all the same. Appending just means that it just stacks it on top, and loading, I think loading and appending was the same, different versions. And replacing brushes basically replaces all the brushes that you have and just puts on the new ones as well. On this menu you can also see that you can change the size of your brush. So you can go smaller and bigger, but it might be a little bit cumbersome, so generally we just use the hotkey. either that you binded one yourself, or we use the default ones, which are the the square bracket keys, these ones. And just by pressing the left one, it goes smaller, and the right one, it goes bigger. Okay. To undo is basically Control Z, just like I guess a universal undo button. But in Photoshop, if you press undo once and you press it again, it cycles back and forth. So to continue to undo, you want to hold down Control and Alt, and then you can keep pressing Z, and that'll keep undoing. Next one is, you can notice that with any of these tools, on top there is I guess options for that tool. You can see how there are opacity. Opacity generally just means more transparency. And we can actually make this brush a bit more transparent by changing the opacity. You can click on the little arrow and drag this bar, or you can just drag on the actual text itself, left and right, to go smaller. So you can see now it's a bit more transparent, and even more transparent. And back to full. But depending on the person, we don't usually use this opacity, but we want to rely more on the brush's actual attribute. So let's undo those ones. To look at the brush's attribute, you can press F5, and then this window pops up. Now I'm not going to go through each one of these, but just the main ones. The first one is the brush tip shape. So I'm just going to change it back to a normal brush first. So let's just go to default hard brush here. So the brush tip shape basically changes the shape of the tip. You can have this more squashed, the spacing a bit more wider, so as you draw it kind of spreads apart. And also with the shape, you can just change the angle of your tip. You can also access that one by right clicking, and it's actually next to size. The older versions actually don't have this one, so you can just access it by here. The next one is actually shape dynamics. So if you have a tablet and that has pen pressure, basically by turning on the control to pen pressure, the harder you press, the thicker the line is, and the softer you press, the thinner the line is. And that's controlled over here. The last one is the transfer, which is basically the opacity, like the one up the top. But if you click on transfer and you change the control to pen pressure, so what it will do is that the harder you press, the more solid the line is. The softer you press, the more transparent the line is. And this is with a tablet and not a mouse. So I'm just going to undo these two as well. Just little quick tips. I'm just going to turn off these two. Is that if you want to draw a straight line, a horizontal or vertical, you can actually hold down Shift. That creates a straight line horizontal. Or holding down Shift and go up, you can have a vertical. Or say if you want to connect these dots, you can actually click once, holding down Shift, and click again, and you'll connect those lines. And again, just Control Z, Control Alt Z. You'll also notice that with the cursor, it will show you the shape of the brush, but sometimes you might accidentally press something and it will look something like this. And as you can see, it's actually the caps lock key. If you press caps lock, it hides it, and then it just becomes like a crosshair. If you press it again, the shape of the brush will actually appear. Alright, so we're going to leave the other ones for a little bit later. We're going to jump straight to layers to the right. So Photoshop is really great because of the layers. It makes things a little bit more efficient and less destructive. So with the layers, I'm just gonna drag out this photo just so we can see it a little bit better. So what layers generally is that you're allowed to now draw on multiple, I guess, layers without having to destroy what you're drawing underneath. So when you first start, you'll see that it opens up this white page with a background, and it's actually locked on the right. This background is actually not transparent. It's actually white, and because it's locked, we actually can't work on top of it. So what we want to do is to press the bottom right here, and there's a little new layer button. And now you can see how it's actually checkered. So it's like gray and white little squares, and that's actually what it means by it's actually transparent. So if I was to hide the background first, I'm just going to click on this eye. You can see how now this page is actually transparent. If I now to draw on this layer, you can see how it appears here, and it is actually transparent. If I make a new layer again, so I'm going to quickly change the color and draw on top, what happens is that I'm just going to move this around. What happens is that it doesn't actually destroy what's underneath. So you can see how effective this can be, is that you can keep making layers and keep drawing on top of each other without it being too destructive. But just note that if you do work on your background layer, you're actually drawing on white and not on a transparent background. And just to show you how to unlock this, if you double click on it on the picture, press OK, now it's unlocked, and you see if I move this around, you're actually moving around a big white square and your black line here. So just keep that one in mind. So I'm just going to undo all this, and I'm going to delete these two layers. And to delete the layers, you can either just click the bin icon or just press the delete key. Click on it and just press delete. Okay, so the next one is, I guess a good tool is duplicating a layer. So if I now press a new layer icon and say for instance I drew something here and I want to duplicate this out, I can press Ctrl J, and now that's a copy of it, and we can move this around as well. The next one is this thing called preserve transparency, which I find it quite handy in Photoshop. So what it is that it's actually locking the pixels. So when I press a new layer, I'm going to just quickly draw just a shape here. What happens is next to lock, there's actually a couple of icons. This one here is preserve transparency. This one here is actually locking the actual layer, just like this one, so you can't move it around. So you can see how that's the same. But if I unlock this one and I press this one, preserve transparency, so it actually looks the same, but it's a different type of lock. What this means is that it actually locks the pixels on that layer. So if I was to just quickly hide the background layer first, I'm coming back on top of here, and I'm going to pick a different color, you can see that when I'm drawing this line, it only stays within the pixels that I drew, and it doesn't draw out. So this can be super handy. So this one is the preserve transparency. Another one is, which is similar to preserve transparency, is clipping mask. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to draw, let's say, this line on top. But say for instance I want this layer to only be drawn on the black circle that I have. Holding down Alt and clicking between the two layers, you can see how the cursor changes to this little arrow and a square. It basically means that I'm going to clip layer 2 on top of layer 1. And once that happens, you can see how it disappears, the bits outside, and it just conforms to that black circle at the bottom. So I can actually move around this here while keeping the whole shape. So this way is that you're again less destructive in your work. We can press actually a new layer, clip another one, and we can use this as multiple layers. So the big difference is that we can work in multiple layers, but with preserve transparency you can only work on its own layer. This one as well. Cool. Let's delete this one and let's delete that one. You can also find that there's an opacity here as well, which we can make the actual that layer more transparent, which is quite handy. And the next one I'm just gonna explain is just the blending tool. So it's basically you can put kind of like I guess you can say like an effect or something on each layer, which I won't go through each one, but you can at least have a play around with it. Okay. Alright. So let's talk about more of these tools here now. So I'm just going to drag out this toolbar To drag it out, you can see how there's a couple little dotted lines here. And drag this one out, and I'm going to press this little arrow just to squash it down, so it's easier to have a look. So the first icon up here was the move tool, like you saw me using before already. So that basically moves like that layer around, or that object that you drew around. But another quick way to access this is actually, let's say you have your paintbrush and you're painting. Oops, let's take this one off. You're painting, and say you want to move your layer around. You can actually hold down the control key while your brush tool is selected, and then you can move it around like that. So it just makes it a little bit more faster. Let's delete this one, make a new layer. The next one that's quite handy is the Marquee Tool. So it's up here. So you have the circle one. If you hold it down, you can see how there's also a rectangle one. So if you drag, you can see how there's this selection. So this is actually not drawn. This is just a selection, just like you're just selecting things. If you want to create a perfect square, you can hold down Shift and drag. If you want to deselect your selection, that's Control D. That deselects it. Okay. So once you have a selection, if you were to now draw, it will also be confined to that selection as well. Okay. So Control D, deselect. So delete this one. So circle also works the same as well. If you want to add a selection, you can hold down Shift, and you can see how the little cursor becomes a little plus sign, and you can keep adding more selections on top. If you want to subtract, you can hold down Alt, and you can see it becomes a minus, and you can just drag and delete. It becomes like this. So Control D, deselect. So delete that one. The next really good tool is the lasso tool. So just like the Marquee tool, it's another selection tool, but the first one is actually just a free form or free selection tool, right? So you have this one where you basically just draw out your selection. Let's say I want to select that. So I want to select that one, holding down Shift, select it as well, which can be quite handy. The other one is actually polygon lasso tool, which functions quite similar, but you basically just click, 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 so you're getting these straight lines. You can actually cycle between the two while you're selecting as well. So let's say I'm just clicking, clicking, and I have something that I want to mask out that's quite, I guess, organic. You can hold down the Alt key and then drag, and it becomes more softer. And if you let go, it becomes basically back to normal, and it works vice versa as well. Okay, so Control D and delete. The last one is the magnetic one. Won't really go through that one, but these two are the main two ones. The next one would be the crop tool. So the crop tool is also quite handy to change the canvas size. We can enlarge it just like, I guess, many other crop tools in different programs. And you can press Escape to cancel. But what's really cool is as well, and I just showed it as well, I was meant to go in this way. But the crop tool actually works the other way as well. So we can actually enlarge an image as well. And you can press Enter to confirm. So you can go, you can go in to make it smaller and out to make it bigger as well. And Escape to cancel. Next one is the eyedropping tool. So eyedropper tool is very handy. I'm just going to put a few colors just to show you first. And so what the eyedropper tool actually does is that it actually color picks that color that you want. So say for instance you have this thing and you have all these colors on the page and you want to pick this green. So you can actually pick the eyedropper tool and eyedrop it, and you can see how your selected color becomes that color wherever you click. Okay. But of course that again is very cumbersome. You know, you're not going to go to that tool all the time. So what's really cool is that if you go back to the brush tool and say you're actually, you know, painting or drawing, and suddenly you want that purple, you can hold down the Alt key, and then you can see how now the cursor changes to the actual eyedropper tool. And while holding it down, you can just click whatever color you want, and then you let go of the Alt key, and it changes back to your brush, and you have now chosen that purple. So Alt key, click, and then paint. Alt key, click, and then paint. So it makes it much more faster. So I'm just gonna undo all these. Next one is the eraser tool. I'm just gonna make a new image and draw something. The eraser tool just functions much like the paintbrush. It will also have all the brushes that you can choose, and you're basically just erasing it just like I guess MS Paint. Paint bucket tool is good to fill in a color as well. Again, I think very similar to MS Paint or many other drawing programs. But so you can actually just make a selection and then we can just fill it in as well. Okay. I'm going to skip some of these ones, but next one is actually color flipping. So I think for me personally, it actually is quite handy. Basically, the first box is your foreground color, which is the color that you're currently using. So say if I keep changing these colors up the top right, this also changes. And this is a background color, which you can also change. So if you click on it, actually sorry, if you click on any of these boxes, you can actually change the colors. Right, when you can actually change the background, right? So what I like about it is that you can basically be using two brushes at the same time. So say for instance I want to use the red, I can click the default key, I think is X, and you can flip to the next color as well. So this works quite well for my workflow, but it's just there. So X is basically flipping it back and forth. And while we're here, I guess we can quickly talk about color. If you click on your box, the color box, you can see that this pops up. And what you're actually looking at is that this vertical line here is actually your color wheel. Okay, so the bottom and the top actually connects. So if you go all the way back down, basically starts again at the top. So you can say, okay, I want to pick a blue. And now what this one does is that this controls your value, or you can say your lightness and brightness, and it also controls your saturation, so how vibrant you want your color to be. So if you go left and right, that's your vibrancy. So you can see how it gets more and more less vibrant, basically more desaturated and becoming a gray. And if you go back towards the right, it's more and more saturated. And then up and down is basically your values, or you can say your lightness of that color. So very dark to very light. Okay. And press OK. Just a really quick note, if you can see your little color window here, if you go to the top right, there's a little option box. If you click on it, you can change it to HSB slider, and that's pretty much what I was basically trying to explain. So you have your color wheel, you have your saturation, and you have your brightness of that color. So it's just, I guess, easier to control if you want to control it this way. Okay. And then finally, if you want to reset all this back to black and white, you can press the default D key, and then it becomes black and white. Cool. Alright, so I'm gonna quickly go through the top bits here. So I'm just gonna paint this back all white. Alright. So we talked about file already. The next one is actually edit. So say for instance if you want to edit anything you drew, say I drew this thing here and I want to edit this layer or this thing, this black object. What you can find here, there's a lot, you can stroke lines and all this stuff, but the biggest one would probably be transform. So let's say you want to change the size of this. If you go to free transform, which is Control T for shortcut, you can hold down, if you hold down shift, you can drag on the corners and you can see how it will scale proportionately. So you can make it bigger or smaller. And by pressing enter, you're basically confirming. So again, coming back to it, Control T, free transform. You can make it larger and smaller. You can also hold down the Control key, and you can click the edges of the corner, and you can actually manipulate it as well. And the other cool one is actually warping it as well. So you can actually click on this button up the top here, or you can right click and you can warp. And what it does is that it kind of builds this kind of mesh on top, or this cloth, and then you can actually pull it and push it. You can change the shape. So you can see how handy this would be if you're just doing these minor adjustments, fixing your perspective or anything like that. You press enter to confirm, and there you have it. So I'm going to delete this one, make another new page. Another good one to look at in edit is keyboard shortcuts. So in the future you might want to make your own shortcuts. So it's actually under this one. You click on keyboard shortcuts, this menu will come up, and just to let you know basically how this works is that if you go look at this drop down box, there's application menus, panels menu, and tools menu. So application menu is pretty much shortcuts for anything that's up here. The panels menus is anything that's floating, and the tools menu is anything that's here. So you will find like brush size and everything down here as well. Okay, under tools. And I think that's good for now. The next one is the image. So the image deals with, I guess you can say your whole image, right? So if you want to change the rotation of your image, you want to flip this to, let's say, a clockwise to more horizontal. If you go to image rotation, and 90% clockwise, you can see how it just changes. You can also change your image or canvas size as well, so you can change it if you have like another one in mind, put it in there and it changes. And the next one is that you can also have adjustments, which you know, I won't go through each one, but you can change your color balance, the hue and saturation, all the things under here as well. So it basically deals with all the I guess the image related things. I guess the last one that's actually good to note is your mode. Sometimes by default it might be grayscale, so you don't know why it's not painting in color. But if it's not, it's probably because if it's not painting in color, it's probably because it's in grayscale mode, and you can actually change it through here. So image, mode, and you can go back to RGB or CMYK depending on what you want. Next one is layers. So layers deals with everything on your layers tab, but it's much the same as this one as well. So this little option box on this window, it's the same here. Type deals with text, and the next one would be select. So this deals with selection. So this one is a good place to note. So say you have your selection and you want to deselect it and you forgot the hotkey, it will be underneath select, and you can see how it's deselect. So for now, you're painting in here. But say you did a selection and you want to paint the opposite side, you can go from select and select inverse, and now I selected the inverse of that, so now when I paint, it's painting the outside. Okay. Okay, let's get that one. Next one is filters. I'm not going to go through each one as well again, but basically filters, you can see it as default Photoshop effects, I guess. And a lot of them are quite helpful. You know, some of them are pretty obvious that you use an effect, but if we use it correctly, you actually can do pretty well. Like things like sharpening something or blurring something. I think it's actually quite handy. Next one is 3D, so we're not going to deal with that one. And we have view, and the last one we probably should talk about though is Windows. So say you lost some of these. So you lost maybe your toolbars and you didn't know where it is. Anything that's floating, just remember it's going to be under Windows. So I lost my layers, it will be Windows, and you can see how it's layers, and it will pop back up. Or your toolbar, you lost your toolbar, so it will be under Windows, and it's all the way at the bottom, Tools. I don't know why they don't put it with this, because it's kind of silly. But anyways, Tools is back to here. So again, if you have lost anything, any windows or these floating panels, you can say, it will be underneath Windows. A quick note is that every window, every floating thing will have a little option box. Okay, so if you ever need to, I guess, do something or look for something within that box, just click on the option box and you'll probably find it in these drop down menus. So little option boxes, you know, this stuff everywhere. Okay, Control D. And I guess the last one to say is the most common things that we usually have open. You know, we have our layers, we have our colors, but another one that's actually quite handy is actually the navigation tool. So it's under Windows and Navigation. And what this one is that, oops, sorry. this one is that it's actually I guess a zoomed out version of your canvas, and this is a good thing to have a little preview from looking at from afar, um, and which you can actually zoom in, zoom out, or if you zoom very far in, you can actually pan around up here as well. Okay. But I hope that helped. And there's of course a lot more to learn from this, but hopefully this just kind of gets you started in, actually opening Photoshop and actually start to be able to get something on the page. And there'll be of course a lot more in class to learn. But thank you, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.